Well, I think that if, you catch a fish and you immediately, put it on its way, you're trying to end the suffering as soon as possible, and now I'm feeding this to my family.
But you've created the suffering. You're not ending the suffering, you've created the suffering.
I created the suffering to feed my families, which is creating healthy relationships.
But you don't have to feed them the fish.
I don't, and then what do I feed them?
Well, plant-based foods instead.
Are you 100% do plants feel?
I mean, if you're trying to make the argument that animals...
We don't know any more that plants feel than the animals do.
Well, we do. We do.
Hey everyone, I'm just interrupting this video briefly to tell you all about today's very exciting sponsor, which is Omni Vegan Dog Food. Did you know that in a 2022 study of over 2,600 dogs, the researchers concluded the pooled evidence to date indicates that the healthiest and least hazardous dietary choices for dogs are actually nutritionally sound vegan diets. In fact, evidence shows that switching your dog to a plant-based diet can actually extend their lifespan and also has proven benefits for gut, skin, and behavioral health. Which brings me to Omni Vegan Dog Food. Omni is the UK's first vet-formulated vegan dog food range. Using plant foods like berries, sweet potatoes, peas, pulses, and oats, Omni provides all the nutritional requirements for dogs as specified by the European Pet Food Industry Federation and meets or exceeds all minimum guidelines for nutrition, including for protein and all the essential amino acids that dogs need as well. Omni's diets come in puppy, adult, and senior-specific life stages and can be fed as a sole ration, which means that you can swap the meat-based food you're currently feeding with Omni very easily and start to see the benefits for yourself. They've also just launched a brand new vegan treat range, so if you want to feed your dog in a way that ensures they get all the nutrients they need to be healthy and happy, while also protecting the environment and of course other animals, then you can get 60% off your first order of one Omni item by clicking the link in my description and using the code ED60 at checkout. Alright, let's get back to the video at hand, but a huge thank you to Omni Vegan Dog Food for sponsoring today's video.
Hi Victor, nice to meet you. My name is Ed, thank you. Today I'm at Boston University. I have a sign that says, why aren't you vegan yet? You very kindly sat down, so I'd love to know what your response to that question is.
So I come from a family of, fishermen, not commercial fishermen, but just hobby fishermen, and
But what about now, in Boston?
I haven't actually been fishing or hunting the last ever in Boston, and then just generally for the last year or so.
Okay, so it's not something that you're doing right now, and maybe we'll circle back and come back to this topic at the end, because I think it's interesting, but maybe not as relevant to your personal situation now.
Yeah.
What animal products are you consuming now, and then why are you consuming them?
Well, let's see. I had Subway for lunch. Steak and cheese. I don't think the quality of that beef is too good. I don't necessarily believe in the industry too much, but
Well, why support it then?
It was just, I didn't think too deep about it. I mean, you can't really always be thinking so deep about things in life. I'm like, all right, let's go get a Subway because I'm in a rush to get to class, and that's just what it was in that moment.
Absolutely, that's what it was in that moment. But do situations or behaviors that can inflict harm onto others, do they demand or do they deserve some form of consideration?
I think it depends because we don't really know how conscious animals are, do we?
What do you think?
I think certain animals are more conscious than others. I have a hard time eating octopus.
Yeah.
I mean, I would never be able to eat a mammal dolphin. You know what I mean? Things. Just because I feel like they're more conscious and they think, and maybe when they're being hunted, they're really feeling possibly like a human could. And I just couldn't, eat those kind of animals. Now, a chicken or a cow, are they really, are they conscious? Are they thinking? Are they feeling? I don't know.
When you say feeling, what do you mean by feeling?
Well, the only way I know how to feel as a human, that's all I can, that's all I can relate to.
What creates feeling for you?
A certain part of the brain, I'm not a neurologist, but there's a certain part of the brain that is, structured for emotion and made for emotion, so that part of the brain.
And of course there's emotional feeling, but there's also physical feeling as well. Do you think animals have the capacity to have physical feelings?
I wonder if it's a reflex. I really do, because fish, they act really they're having reflexes to certain things going on.
How else would they act? They don't have the vocal capacities to make
exactly.
noises.
So it's okay, so they don't have vocal capacities, now they're not expressing, so they have an expressive part of the brain that is an emotional part of the brain. So are they really feeling if they're not vocalizing?
Well, let's put it this way. Obviously, there are certain things that we do when we have a sensation of pain. And obviously, we might scream. And obviously, cows, pigs, they do vocally emit noises. Dogs do as well. But beyond that, there are also things that happen, such as dilation of pupils, heavy breathing, heart rate can increase, things that we can defecate. There are certain things like that are indicative of a sensation or experience beyond just the vocalization of that. So other animals do have those same biological markers, or they do display the same biological behaviors that we do. And the reason I asked the thing about why do you have feelings was to emphasize that feeling in terms of like pain is based on a nervous system that sends the signal up to the brain that receives that and then creates a sensation of pain. And there's also the evolutionary perspective. We feel pain to avoid danger. But then also other animals also have the same reason, evolutionary speaking, to experience pain and suffering like we do, because it's a survival mechanism that allows us to avoid things like flames or things that might cause us harm and suffering and pain. It's about survival at the end of the day.
Yes, I agree. It is about survival. But, just because an animal is equipped for surviving and has these reflexes for surviving doesn't mean that it's conscious and feeling. Okay. I don't think that you have to put those I don't think one equals another necessarily.
Okay. So with that in mind then, can we do anything we want to a cow or a chicken or a pig because they don't have, as you might argue or trying to argue, they don't have feelings?
Well, if they don't have feelings, then is it like almost... I don't want to say, inanimate. Just seems like it doesn't seem like the wrong word. But if they're not feeling, then what's going on there? That like why can't we eat them? Why can't we?
Why can't we do anything to them? Burn them alive, stab them, mutilate them.
What would you do that for? That would almost be like kind of like a useless reason. Burning them alive doesn't.
Well, for fun.
Well, I don't feel fun from making animals suffer.
But how can they suffer if they don't feel?
Well, then if they're not feeling or suffering, it doesn't matter. I'm still not doing it because
Why?
Because I'm not feeling joy from that.
But if someone does feel joy, does that make it okay?
No, it doesn't. Not in that case.
Why?
Because making something suffer for no good reason.
But how can they suffer if they don't feel?
Well, then if they don't have to. I'm saying if that person is feeling joy from what they perceive as animal suffering, then they.
But you're making the argument that animals don't feel.
Yes.
And if they don't
I'm not making
feel,
an argument. I'm saying it's a possibility, and I don't know.
Okay, but But the reason that you're against someone like setting an animal on fire, for example, is because you are concerned that they have the capacity to suffer.
Yeah.
So if you have the concern that they have the capacity to suffer, why don't you put that concern into other situations where they also could potentially, in your eyes, have the capacity to suffer, such as when they're being fished or such as when they're being farmed and slaughtered?
I do, but since I'm not certain. I'm only like kind of 50-50 on it, or maybe not even that. It's not enough for me to concern, and that's just what it is,
So. But it's enough for you to say that someone shouldn't do certain things to animals, but the things that you want to do to animals are okay to do.
Well, I think that if, you catch a fish and you immediately, put it on its way, you're trying to end the suffering as soon as possible, and now I'm feeding this to my family.
But you've created the suffering. You're not ending the suffering, you've created the suffering.
I created the suffering to feed my families, which is creating healthy relationships.
But you don't have to feed them the fish.
I don't, and then what do I feed them?
Well, plant-based foods instead.
Are you 100% like plant? Like, do plants feel? Like, I mean,
if you're trying to make the argument that animals...
We don't know any more that plants feel than the animals do.
Well, we do. We do. In the same way that we have an understanding that we feel based on certain biological markers, evolutionary functions, and also responses. These animals also display these things.
We can say, I feel, and this human likely feels the same way I do, but we just can't do that with animals. We just can't. We can say dolphins recognize themselves in the mirrors. We can say that they react certain ways.
But they can't feel pain.
I said dolphins likely can, and that's why I would never eat a mammal dolphin.
But why can dolphins?
Because they're just so much more intelligent than other animals.
But where's that stemming from?
The recognizing themselves in mirrors, solving certain puzzles.
But there are humans.
Same with orangutans.
But there are humans who maybe have severe learning difficulties, who maybe not be self-aware. But that doesn't mean they don't feel pain if we were to stab them.
Oh, as a human, if you're born a human, you have human rights. So that's where that stems from.
But the argument you're making now is that worth of life is dependent on the recognition of oneself. So being able to see oneself in the mirror and know that is oneself. But the argument I would make is there are humans who maybe lack that ability due to certain learning difficulties, but their ability to feel pain isn't then disregarded. they still feel pain regardless of that lack of self-awareness when looking into the mirror.
Well, exactly. They feel pain, which is why they're human beings and why they feel.
Well, that's not why they're human beings, but the requirement to feel pain and suffer doesn't stem from the understanding of seeing oneself in the mirror and understanding that is oneself, because feelings like pain and suffering are separate from a conscious awareness of oneself. And I'm not saying that animals don't have that. I do think that animals are aware of oneself, even if they don't necessarily recognize that in the mirror. But I'm saying the two aren't inextricably tied to one another.
I understand what you're saying, and I don't think that we're necessarily like disagreeing on too much. I mean, humans likely, humans, almost all humans, I mean, from what you're saying, feel pain and have the, ability to suffer and feel emotion. And likely some animals do too, but do you believe that all animals have the same ability to suffer and feel emotion?
No, not the same ability. I don't think that an aphid, for example, has the same ability as, say, that of a cow or a pig or a dolphin or a primate. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that all animals feel and experience in the exact same way, but I am making the argument, or trying to at least, that the animals who we kill have experiences and the capacity to experience that makes their life and their experiences they have worthy of our consideration. So whilst we can't definitively say that a cow suffers the same way as we do, or maybe they suffer more, we don't know. That's the point, right? Whilst we can't say that they do or don't, what we can surmise based on certain things like biology and reactions and things like that is that they do have an experience, and that experience in and of itself means that we should view their life as having or deserving consideration that makes doing the things that we do to them morally wrong.
I see where you're coming from, and I think that's noble. I think it's very good to consider other living beings. Although, I mean, would you think that all human beings today on the globe can be vegans? I don't think they can, because not everybody has that option. Maybe you and me do today.
I agree. Not everyone does, but the reason why I'm here and the reason why the banner says "Why aren't you vegan yet?" is to highlight that point that there may be people in the world who can't, and I'm not going to argue against that. But it's about what we can do. You and I, in this moment right now, what can we do? And if we can be vegan, then that conversation is different to can other people be vegan, because it's specifically about the capacities that you and I have.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm going back to just what I believe in the argument that I sat down here today with, which is, I'm not sure. I'm not certain of what these animals are feeling, and it's just not enough for me to be vegan, because that would be a pretty big catalyst in my life as far as dieting and eating goes. So,
but interestingly, it is enough for you to be against certain other things, like as I said before, setting an animal on fire or something. You are against doing certain things to animals. So there is an obvious contradiction, which is the things that you don't want to do, you're against, but the things that you do want to do, all of a sudden this justification holds up. But to me, that seems hypocritical, because it should be either we don't do anything that causes suffering to an animal when we can avoid it, or everything's okay in that regard.
Well, I mean, I believe that you can kill an animal and then eat it, and then I feel like that could be okay, but I feel like making an animal suffer and not necessarily getting any more meat or any more food or any more benefit from this might not be so okay, and that's what I stood for.
Absolutely, but what you're against is the suffering, and let's say setting an animal on fire, which is the example we've been using, is one of the most horrific things we could do to an animal who can suffer. That doesn't mean that in and of itself doing something that does less suffering to the animal is then justified as a result of that, when we have something that can cause even less suffering overall. And the reason why I use an extreme example like the setting on fire is to illustrate that when push comes to shove, we don't like it because it causes animal suffering. So the argument that I'm making is that if we're against suffering of animals, then we should do what we can to reduce it as much as we can. And in that sense, that's what leads me to veganism, because whilst there are situations where we can kill an animal that causes less suffering than setting them on fire, of course, if there's a situation where we don't have to cause any suffering to an animal, that is the preferable thing for us to choose.
Okay, so you for the most part, I don't know if you believe animals are conscious or not, but okay, so now we have a good amount of animals that eat other animals. What do you say about these animals?
Well, they don't have the moral agency that we do. These other animals, they do so because they have to, and also they can't rationalize their decisions. So I don't think we should look to them as role models. For example, other animals rape one another. Are we then justified to rape because other animals also do that?
No, I don't think so. But you mentioned that these animals don't have the same moral ability as us and stuff, which is kind of, leading to my argument, which was maybe animals have less understanding, less consciousness, less moral ability than us. So I mean, that kind of supports the argument almost.
Not necessarily, because the argument is that we can't hold lions and tigers to the same moral standard as us because we have increased intelligence, which creates increased moral agency, which also creates increased moral accountability. But even though other animals may not be as cognitively advanced as we are in that sense, what's important is what they can experience and what we force them to experience through our choices. And so, whilst I'm not going to say that other animals are as cognitively advanced as we are, the argument I'm making is they're more cognitively advanced than plants, and their capacity to suffer is higher than that of plants. And as a consequence, consuming plants reduces suffering overall and reduces death overall compared to the consumption of animals. And that's where this argument, for me, is, that's where I'm coming from, I guess.
Yeah, I understand. I think we should, we'll leave it there for today.
Well, what do you think then? What does contribute to less suffering and death overall?
I mean, in the definition of that, the question, it would be if plants definitely suffer less than animals, then it would be to be vegan. But we don't necessarily 100% know that.
Well, I also don't necessarily 100% know that a baby suffers more than, an animal or a plant, using that same logic. But what we have is, I suppose, logical intuition, and also, as I've said many times before, the things that we know that have created this sensation within you and I. I know that you feel pain, or I can at least surmise that you probably do, because I know that I feel pain, and I know the reasons why I feel pain. And I can look at another animal and see that they have the same reasons, evolutionarily speaking, as I do. They have the same biological systems as I do, and also they react in a similar way that I do when I feel pain. And so they might not go, "Ow, that hurts, I'm in pain," but they may bark, they may cower, they may make noises, and also their body reacts in a similar way. They try to avoid that. They prefer situations where pain is reduced. They prefer situations where they don't have to live in fear. That's why they prioritize the same things that we do, which is comfort and safety. And that to me is a very instinctive drive, or an intuitive, at least, argument for believing that they suffer, and as a result of that deserve consideration. That means that we should consume plants over them.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, although we all were, as humans were once babies. We know that we can just relate more to babies because, they're human beings, they're young, infant human beings. We were once just like that. And humans react from emotion, so we just, relate so much more to babies.
We do relate to them, but using the logic that you're using, you can't prove to me that the baby in a hospital right now feels more or less than a calf or a cow or indeed a plant, using the logic that you're using. You can't prove that to me.
No, we can, but I'm not.
Do that.
We let the baby, live with his parents and grow up with his parents because I am not a baby eater. I don't eat baby.
No, why do we give that baby consideration? If we use the logic that you're using, why don't we treat the baby like we do any other animal or indeed plant?
Well, I mean, assuming that we're sane, then there could be certain reasons. But I mean, there's definitely plenty of psychopaths out there that if there were no law, if it was the purge, they would probably do some really fucked up things. I don't even think that as a human.
Right?
Why
would that be bad?
Because I just, as me, Victor, I believe that babies shouldn't be abused. They shouldn't suffer.
Why? How do you know they suffer?
Well, we don't, but we know that one day it has a chance to be a human being like myself, and I think that babies that shouldn't be traumatized. If there's a chance that the baby has memory from those early moments in its life.
But how do you know that they suffer?
Oh, we don't. But regardless, a baby still has human rights, and that I'm not going to break the law, and I wouldn't even want to. But if there's a psychopath out there that wants to, they wouldn't do it for certain reasons legally. And then if you're a sane human being, you wouldn't want to do it because you can relate and you feel emotions towards this other human being.
And I agree that obviously humans have rights and we recognize that. But the point I'm trying to make is that because what we're doing right now with the animal stuff is we're disregarding their biology, we're disregarding the evolutionary reasons for them to feel pain, and we're disregarding the things that they do that will be indicative of them experiencing pain. There's things I've spoken about a few times now. The argument that you're making is disregarding all of those things. And I'm saying that if we take the example of a human baby or any human, if we also disregard all three of those things, we also have nothing to prove that they feel pain or suffer. Because the reason that we recognize that other animals, including humans, feel pain and suffer is because of these three things. So disregarding them means that we're also disregarding our acknowledgement that humans can suffer as well. That's the point I'm trying to make.
All right, and I mean, when I'm hunting, if you shoot an animal, I mean, you try to target its vitals so that it gets killed immediately, so that it doesn't suffer. Assuming that that animal could suffer, we try to end the life as soon as possible so that it doesn't suffer.
So why do that if you're in doubt?
Because there's a chance.
Exactly, there's a chance. And so if there's a chance that they can suffer, let's do what we can to minimize the suffering and death that we cause.
I think that's a fair argument, and I'll consider it. And let's end it there.
Okay, all right, thanks, Victor.
Thank you.